is the role of nature in actually modifying the climate and helping us adapt to climate change. And you'll hear a lot more as we go into the UN General Assembly next week about the focus on nature-based solutions, or the way nature can help us mitigate climate and adapt to the impacts of climate. Such things such as stopping global deforestation or reforestation, or even putting efforts into rebuilding our soils for agriculture again. So we know what to do on climate. We need the political will. It's not the science. What about for the other three sustainable development goals that underpin human development? There was just a 2019, some of you may have missed it, in May. There's a 2019 UN report by IPBES. It's the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, but I'm just going to call it the 2019 UN Environmental Report because that's a mouthful. It's a report that said we actually really need to focus on nature, the non-human world with living organisms and their diversity. But at the same time, when nature is whole and it's working well, we need to recognize that nature contributes a whole lot to human well-being. And this report systematically went through the ways in which nature contributes to human well-being. And I think that most of you probably know these, and you probably think about it intuitively, but when you see it as a set, it becomes really clear that we need to be better at protecting nature, our life support system. It goes on from things that you would think about the World Wildlife Fund really caring about, which is habitat creation and maintenance. After all, it is habitat that creates the home for all of the species on the planet. But it's also pollination, pollinating some very important nutritional crops that are going to be critical for us in the future. It includes the regulation of freshwater flow. It includes the regulation of hazards and extreme events, particularly on the coast. So coral reefs can often help in modifying the impact of extreme storms. It also includes medicinal, biochemical, genetic resources. So there's a whole array of benefits we get from nature, and we are systematically undermining it as if we don't actually depend on those benefits, and we do. So is the science lacking on this? I would say the science is under construction. I think we know it's important, but it's not like where we are in climate, where we actually know exactly what we need to do in climate. We know what the global targets are. We know exactly what each of our industries need to do. We know how we need to act together to make it happen. But it's not true with nature, because nature acts to provide benefits for humans at all scales, at the global scale, at the regional scale, water delivery, and also at the local scale, pollination services, and the lot. So targets to underpin human well-being need to be developed at the global, regional, and local scale, so the nations of the world actually need to know what they need to do to actually conserve nature that underpins human well-being. And we need to act fast with the assessments and safeguard the Earth's natural life support systems. So the science is clear, but the science isn't super clear about the targets we need to set at all these scales. And that's a really important point. So what about the top policy targets? One of the things I think that's really important for us to think about is that when you have a very separate climate agreement and you implement it very separately, and you have a very separate nature agreement and you implement it separately, and you have a very separate human development agreement and you implement it separately, you have these three things moving forward undermining one another systematically over and over again. You have roads being built through wetlands that are critical nursery habitats for fish. You have the destruction of a reef system where we depend on fish. So it's really important that we take these together and implement them together. So moving forward into 2020, and this the UN General Assembly meeting in New York next week is critically important for beginning to build an agenda, an integrated agenda for nature where we link the Sustainable Development Goals more explicitly with what we're trying to achieve in climate, more explicitly with what we're trying to achieve with the Convention on Biological Diversity and the Conservation of Nature. And one of the movements that has arisen in the last year to actually meet that challenge is the movement called the Deal for Nature and People. This is a recognition that we are inextricably linked, and if we see these as separate, we will fail. If we see them as together and we begin to implement them together, we have a chance of succeeding. So we want to protect and restore nature by 2030 for benefit of people and for nature. The agenda says then by 2030, and this means by 100% sustainability by 2050, but 2030 is an incredibly important marker. We want to be able to provide food for 9 billion people. We want to be able to have water for 9 billion people. We want the diversity of life on the planet. No one wants to give up the diversity of life on this earth. Certainly not the rhinos, certainly not the elephants and other important species. We absolutely need a stable climate. When people talk about a climate crisis, we are experiencing it, and we know what the science is. We need to act on that, and we need inclusive, healthy communities that are able to act in concert to deliver global outcomes. So what does that look like? It means that 50% of the planet by 2030 needs to be protected, restored, or sustainably managed. What does that look like? That's not for me to decide. It's not for the World Wild Fund for Nature to decide either. It's really for us to decide as a people in ways that are inclusive and healthy for communities across the globe. We also need a 50% reduction in the impact of unsustainable production and consumption. This means that the nations of the world that consume too much need to really look at their consumption patterns and begin to get those in line with a sustainable planet. And this is not something we're talking about in an open kind of way. And we really need to start about what does it look like to have a sustainable planet for all. And we need to make sure that we have a zero extinction of threatened species. So you can see in these kinds of targets, this isn't just a climate target. These aren't just a target for human development. It's not just a target for biodiversity and for the protection of species. These are targets for an entire planet, a sustainable planet in the future. We are working closely with governments of the world, with our NGO partners of the world, with corporations, with finance partners in developing how we actually do this. So the answers, we don't have all the answers yet, but we do invite you to think about joining the Deal for Nature and People and think about what innovation you can bring to the table to deliver a sustainable planet for safeguarding both human health and natural systems that underpin it. Thank you.